Then, of course, we have the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus and his writings, the Jewish Antiquities, and the Jewish War. Here is an image of Flavius Josephus along with his texts. This, of course, focuses upon biblical traditions of comets, and especially the famous Star of Bethlehem. Now, the topic of the Star of Bethlehem is a topic for a separate video altogether. I think perhaps the best synopsis of the various traditions regarding the Star of Bethlehem comes from the astronomer Dr. Aaron Adair and his book, The Star of Bethlehem, A Skeptical View. Here is an image of him and his book. Now, I personally think that Dr. Adair is a bit too skeptical, especially regarding astrology. Nonetheless, I mostly agree with his synopsis, which is that the Star of Bethlehem, as presented in the Gospel of Matthew, is a supernatural event, not a natural, not an astronomical, not an astrological event. And this was also the opinion of my former professors at the Institute of Jewish Studies for the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, Dr. O. Herb Hurt and Dr. William Cruson. Nonetheless, I think that this tradition in the Gospel of Matthew does have certain astrological and astronomical aspects to it, although it is intending what would basically be a supernatural event. Now, I personally do not think that the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew was authentic, with its story about Egypt, the Magi, the Star of Bethlehem, and the murder of the innocents. I think it was added later, but that is also a topic for another video. I do, however, want to focus a little bit upon the possibility of the Star of Bethlehem being a comet or a star. Regarding the comet of 44 BCE, the Star of Kaiser, Dr. Adair mentions that it was understood as a star rather than a comet by his supporters. However, it was understood as a comet with its tail by his enemies. I think this is significant, perhaps in regards to the Star of Bethlehem, which could have been a comet potentially, but was also considered to be a star. Therefore, perhaps it could be a good omen and a bad omen at the same time, depending upon the context. Now, as to the Star of Bethlehem allegedly standing over Bethlehem, the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus does mention that during the Roman Jewish War, a star stood over Jerusalem and it resembled a sword, as well as a comet that was seen for an entire year. Now, this star and this comet may have been the same event. Now, as I mentioned in the previous section regarding Pliny the Elder, this star or comet was probably the comet of 76 CE, which was cited by Titus before he became Caesar during the War of the Jews and the Romans. Now, this event is cited in the Jewish War, section 6:3-289. Now, of course, there is speculation that both the Star of Bethlehem and the star during the Jewish-Roman War may have been Halley's Comet. However, to the best of my knowledge, Halley's Comet was cited in 12 BCE, not 5 BCE or 1 BCE, and also in 66 CE, not 76 CE. Of course, I want to mention the famous prophecy of Balaam in Numbers 24:17, which talks about a star of Jacob and a scepter of Israel. In the original Hebrew, Star of Jacob is Kokav Meyachov. And in the original Hebrew, Scepter of Israel is Shevet Me'Israel. In his Kabbalistic astrology, Rabbi Joel C. Dobin mentions that the Hebrew word Shevet, translated into English as scepter, may also be translated as a comet or a meteor, and I tend to agree with this opinion. Here is an image of the good rabbi and his book, Kabbalistic Astrology. Perhaps a link can be made between the Pons-Brooks comet and this American total solar eclipse in regard to an eclipse that happened allegedly during the time of King Herod, according to Josephus. And then also this Star of Bethlehem, or comet tradition, from the Gospel of Matthew. Now in his Jewish Antiquities, Flavius Josephus, in section 17:8-4-167, mentions a lunar eclipse that happened around the time of King Herod, shortly before his death. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this would be in 5 BCE or 4 BCE. As I mentioned in the previous section, in regards to Pliny the Elder and his natural history, on his section on astronomy, he also mentions eclipses in section 53. First, he mentions Thales of Miletos, who predicted a solar eclipse during the Battle of Halus in 585 BCE. This was a battle between Alauates, the king of Lydia, against Caiachares, the king of Media, after Alauates had expelled the Chimoroi, the Cimmerians, from Lydia. I find it rather interesting that today, as I was editing this footage from the other week, that they did the lighting of the torch ceremony for the upcoming Olympics. Now, allegedly, during the 48th Olympiad of 588 BCE, Thales of Miletus, he gave this prediction about the solar eclipse on 585 BCE. Next, he mentions the Roman general Caius Sulpicius Gallus, who predicted a lunar eclipse at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BCE. During this battle, the Romans won a decisive victory against Perseus of Macedonia and against the Macedonic phalanx. Lastly, he mentions the Greek astronomer Hipparchus of Rhodos, who essentially made the first almanacs to predict solar and lunar eclipses sometime between circa 162 to 127 BCE.